Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
As a doctor, I'm bound by doctor-patient privilege to not disclose the specifics of what I'm about to tell you. But as a human being, I feel compelled to share. This is, without a doubt, the most horrific story I've ever had the displeasure of being a part of. It was 2009, and my schedule for that day was light. I was just finishing up my lunch when I got a call from a friend and colleague who had his own practice in the same building as me. Sometimes we would send work each other's way when we knew the other could use it. I was a bit elated at the prospect of him calling me because I'd just begun going over my books and stressing a bit.
Are you busy right now? I'd like to send someone up to you,
he said. No, my afternoon is barren. What are the details?
It's a walk-in. From the look of it, an eating disorder. Her mother is concerned.
Eating disorder. Those can be unpleasant. I'd actually had a bulimic throw up in my office once when I stepped out momentarily to check my calendar. Still, I needed the work. All right, send her up. I tried to tidy up my desk to make my office look more presentable and professional while I waited. 10 minutes ticked by and no patient showed up, so I stepped out to go looking for her. When I got to the hall, there was a small contingent of people standing around the elevator. They were talking amongst themselves. What's going on? I asked.
The elevator's broke,
someone said. Shit. I bet she's on there, I thought. What floor is it stuck on?
10th and 11th?
Yeah, that would be about right. My colleague's office was on the 10th, 3 floors down. I knew from experience that it could be anywhere up to an hour before they got the elevator working again. I hoped she wasn't claustrophobic. Returning to my office, I called downstairs.
What's up?
My colleague asked after picking up. She's stuck in the elevator. He laughed.
Really? Poor thing.
What's her name?
Amelia.
He paused.
Amelia D. something.
All right, thanks. If you got any impressions on her from your brief visit, maybe you can share them later. Over drinks?
Sure,
Don't tell me. I want to form my own opinion first.
Okay.
True to form, an hour and 10 minutes later, I heard a loud cheer from the hallway, indicating the elevator had started working again. I should go make sure she's all right, I thought to myself, and went out to join the throng of people standing around in the hallway. There were a lot more people by then, and I couldn't make my way to the elevator doors or even see them from where I was, but I could hear it when the elevator dinged, indicating it was stopping on our floor, and the rolling mechanical sound of the doors opening. There was a loud gasp from the crowd of people, followed by a lot of jabbering.
Holy shit!
Someone said quite loudly. People started hustling away from the elevator, shoving past me. I struggled against the tide and made my way to where a number of people were standing around, staring into the elevator cab. As I approached, I could smell this stench. It was like stumbling into the apartment of a recluse who hadn't come out or bathed for years. It rolled like a wave out of the elevator and cascaded over everyone in the hallway. A young man in a business suit who looked dressed for an interview was covering his mouth and nose with a handkerchief. I skirted around him to see into the elevator. The woman in the elevator was not at all what I was expecting. Massively obese, she looked like she weighed somewhere around 500-600 pounds. Her face was so puffed up, her eyes were barely visible, just 2 dark dots above her cheeks. She had frizzed out brown hair that still had curlers in it. The notion that I was smelling a recluse seemed all the more plausible at the sight of her. Her mouth was covered with what looked like greasy barbecue sauce. There was even some sort of gristle at the corners of her lips. There was more of it all over her hands and wiped down the front of her shirt. It looked like she had come straight from an all-you-can-eat rib buffet. Clenched tightly in one of her hands was a big black trash bag that sagged full of something that seemed to slosh around inside it. The smell coming out of it was nauseating. The woman stepped out of the elevator, her eyes and nose running with tears and mucus. I stepped forward while everyone else backed away, horrified. "Amelia?" I asked her. She looked at me through her beady little piggy eyes, her cheeks covered with that vile red gunk and streaking with tears, and opened her mouth. For about 3 seconds, I had the horrible notion that she was going to vomit an entire barbecue on me.
I was hungry.
She stuttered with a thick southern accent. The young man in the suit heaved involuntarily at the smell of her breath, and then strode away, trying to maintain his demeanor. "That's okay. Do you want to talk about it in my office?" I said, reaching out to help her. Seeing me reach out to her, she clenched her black trash bag tightly and hugged it to her chest. The contents of it made a sickening squish sound. I could taste my own lunch in the back of my throat. "Is that yours?" I asked. "I'm not going to take it." She started sobbing, this horrible, almost hob-like squeal of a sob. Honestly, I didn't want to touch her. I wanted to go back into my office, lock the door, and pretend I was glad my afternoon was completely empty. The smell wafting off her and off that bag of spoils was going to be permeating every crevice of my office for days. I just knew it. Still, this was a human being that had come seeking my help, and I was not about to turn her away. "My office is right down the hall. Why don't you come with me?" I started walking. In my head, I said, if she doesn't come with me, fuck it. She can go back to her apartment that's probably filled with roaches and feces and who knows what other ungodly things, and I'll find someone else to help. But she followed me, lumbering on legs that stretched the limits of the sweatpants she had on. I held the door open for her and she waddled in, kneading the contents of that trash bag in her thick sausage fingers, making it belch and splurch. She stopped and just stood there in the middle of my office.
The elevator got stuck.
She mumbled. "Yes, I'm sorry about that. I hope you were all right. Thank goodness you brought something to eat, yes?" She started crying again, squeezing her trash bag, and I was afraid it was going to explode and leave God knows what all over my office floor. She nodded as her face turned red and tears poured out of seemingly every pore of her head. I went and got her a box of tissues and handed her a couple. She tried to take them while still holding onto the bag with both hands. "Would you like me to hold that?" I offered, praying she'd say no. She shook her head. "What do you have in there?" I finally decided to ask. She huffed and snorted, trying to inhale all the fluid back into her face. Using one of the tissues, she mopped her eyes and mouth, getting blotchy red smears all over the place.
Leftovers?
She stuttered. Then her chest started heaving, and she threw her head back and started bawling again. Her face was like a fountain. She was so utterly miserable, and I really started to feel bad for her. "Look," I said, "getting stuck in that elevator was obviously pretty traumatic." Her wailing hit a crescendo. "So why don't we postpone things until you've calmed down a bit?" She struggled through her sobbing.
You want to meet with me?
"Well, yes, but not today. Why don't you go home and try to relax. I don't think you're in the right frame of mind right now to talk. So let's schedule an appointment for later this week. How does that sound? I walked back to my desk and got out one of my cards. Her mouth was quivering and she looked ready to collapse into a pile of screaming phlegm, but she was calming down a bit, just nodding more than anything. And she took my card with the same sticky fingers holding several drippy tissues.
Thank you.
She said quietly. I couldn't read her face at all. Her features were so red and swollen and wet that she seemed almost blank and expressionless. Do you want me to escort you down to the lobby? I asked, in case something happens with the elevator again. It should be all right, but I don't want you to be nervous. She shook her head.
That doesn't seem like a good idea.
Okay. And with that, she turned around and waddled out of my office, slowly, sobbing slightly every now and then. With her went that sloshy black trash bag, and with them both went that putrid aroma of filth and squalor. I literally breathed a sigh of relief as I heard the door click shut. She never called me back. It was a week later that I finally got around to having drinks with my colleague from downstairs. We were relaxing, having a couple beers, and I suddenly remembered her. Oh, thanks, by the way, I said.
For what?
For Amelia.
Who?
Amelia. Eating disorder. Last week you sent her up to me, remember?
Oh, right.
He sipped his beer.
The one who got stuck in the elevator. How did that go?
She was a wreck, I said, sobbing and practically hysterical. I talked her into rescheduling, but she hasn't called me to make an appointment.
Did you talk to her mother?
No, I didn't get any information from her. I gave her my card.
What did you think?
He asked. Classic food dependency, I said. Definitely a binge eater. Her face was just all...
No, not the mother, I mean Amelia.
What?
What did you think of Amelia?
He said again. I'm telling you what I thought.
Amelia, the scrawny 12-year-old girl, you think is a binge eater?
What? No, that's not... And then it hit me. Was her mother with her?
Yeah, I sent them both up to you.
They were in the elevator together? He looked at me, and the same dawning realization came over his face. Needless to say, she never rescheduled. Amelia D. something. Nor did her mother, the nameless, obese woman I met that day at the elevator, smelling like death, covered in gore, and carrying her trash bag of sloshing leftovers.
From author T.J. Lee, I give you Honk If You're Hungry. A portly, haggard clown stood opposite, clutching a pathetic sign from rotting cardboard with crude markers scribbled across the front. His putty-stained gloves and sour facial expression gave the whole thing an even weirder vibe. His frayed white outfit was smeared with red, black, and gray putty, some of it practically dripping off of him as he moved his body at awkward angles to accommodate the feats of the cardboard. What the fuck? Jesse and I exchanged a look of bewilderment at the absolute state of the man some 20 feet away from us in the rapidly dwindling parking lot. It was late. There'd been a phenomenal concert across the street where my ever-daring friend Jesse got a little too rowdy and had his face kicked in. We were absolutely engrossed in his hilarious wincing before the sound filled our ears. The smell assaulted our nostrils, and our eyes felt like they needed bleaching after reaching the source. Bro, I don't think you mean hungry, Jesse began, still clutching his nose and sounding almost comically congested. I think you meant honk if you're Ow! I punched him hard in the ribs and refused to break eye contact with the meat clown as he gingerly twirled the sign around, the cardboard threatening to shatter like his pathetic frame at any moment. He took a step forward, the tarmac looking like it'd swallow his sad existence whole at any moment, his eyes transfixed on me and Jesse as a soft gurgle began parting his lips and working its way through the air into our ears. Huh. It carried on the wind, but it wasn't strong enough to make out. I thought maybe he was coughing as Jesse continued to bitch and moan. What the hell, Rich? He rubbed his arm dramatically, barely paying attention to the meat clown shuffling towards him. But I was. Something about him just felt off. He started to sway from side to side, and closing that gap slowly but surely. My hair stood on end. Jesse, on the other hand, fueled by adrenaline, walked confidently towards him and held out a hand to his ear. Tell me a joke, Brother Penny, he bellowed, fully expecting laughter to break out at any moment. But it didn't. Honk. The sound became clearer, each consonant gurgled out in a guttural drone, his eyes wide and piercing amid a sea of white makeup and thick black eyeliner, a red sigil painted on both sides of his cheeks and joining down at the chin. He edged closer, gripping the sign tightly, nails digging into the cardboard. One started to peel away as it was forced in further, black, rotting flesh poking out from underneath. You'll have to speak up, my man. I gotta say, so far, your outfit is way funnier than your routine, Jesse bellowed, slapping his thigh dramatically and laughing. But when the clown kept walking close, his laughter petered away very quickly. Before I'd even had a chance to close the gap and pull Jesse away, this macabre mascot was face to face with him. Literally. I immediately walked towards them, sensing danger. But with every step came new clarity on his features, and I am ashamed to say, I slowed down when I heard him properly. Honk was all he emitted, but it was guttural, low, elongated, like a rumbling in his diaphragm that his throat was barely able to push out beyond a croak, the last gasp of a dying soul, rushing to leave a decaying corpse. His eyes were the sole thing on him that looked alert. The white paint wasn't white paint. It was sallow, malnourished skin stretched to the absolute brink over gaunt cheeks and frail limbs. His outfit's putty was covered in flies and maggots. The stench was enough to make me gag. Jesse stood, frozen in horror as the clown pressed his face directly onto his, unblinking as he continued his bizarre and unnerving cry. As I pulled Jesse back by the scruff of his neck, a sickening squelch sound followed by a snap cut the air and stopped the bizarre honk. It was a portion of his nose. The gangrenous flesh was still attached to Jesse as he screamed and pulled at it, desperate to get it off of his face, though the clown seemed completely nonplussed by the issue. He simply bowed, wiped his hand, and held up the sign, walking away from us and towards a small food shack at the far end of the parking lot, where the woods began. It had a few benches with some people sitting around it, and black smoke was billowing out of its chimney top, but the inside was a mixture of too far and too dark to make out. Dude, that was the grossest prank ever! This isn't YouTube! Jesse shouted after him, but clearly too frightened to pursue. He finally ripped the flesh off of his nose and stomped on it, calling it shitty putty, as he did. But as we got a little bit further away, the same sound rang out again. A guttural, almost muffled and elongated honk. The noise filled the empty parking lot, and I looked around for its source, unlocking the truck as I did so. "Jesse, what the fuck you think he is?" I asked, craning my neck as if somehow the weird fucker had grown wings and turned into the ultimate nightmare fuel for any sane person. A flying clown. When I turned to look back, expecting Jesse to be halfway into the car and grabbing the AUX cord so he could blast my ears with Code Orange, I saw him kneeling on the floor and clutching at his stomach. I'm so hungry, he winced, pulling at his stomach and his head shaking profusely. I thought he was having some kind of food poisoning moment and didn't know if I should move him or give him some room for the impending explosion. But before I could even move, I heard that sound again, clearer and more pronounced. Jesse was making it. I looked at him, and while still clutching his stomach, his mouth hung open and the noise rang out, filling my ears and giving me goosebumps. Not knowing what else to do, I helped him to his feet and started towards the truck. "Come on, man, I got food at mine if that's what you need. But I really think you should go to a hospital." "No!" He pushed me away with surprising strength. It took me aback. I stared at him in shock as his face grew wild, instinctual, maddened. "I need to eat. That's too far. But there's that place right there." He pointed a shaky finger to the shack that the mascot had wandered off to. "That'll do. Not far. Come on." He winced again before setting off. "Do you want to follow what could be the end result of Pennywise fucking a zombie?" "Dude, he just freaked you out. He freaked me out. Can't we just get food at home?" If I'm honest, I was pleading more for me than him. Clowns bothered me at the best of times. But this one, being devoid of joy entirely, set me off all the more. Jesse wasn't having any of it, though. He sauntered off and spoke less and less as we got closer. The shack had a dingy sign written above it, but it must have been in another language or made up of the same symbols in the clown's cheeks because I couldn't make heads or tails of it. It was pretty sizable, and there was no car attached. Instead, it was just placed directly onto the concrete, with huge metal clamps in the corners jutting out. The cook must have been absent, as the inside was pitch black, save for some swift movements from something inside. The benches had a couple of homeless people sleeping on them, but given the part of the city we live in and the late hour, I sadly wasn't surprised. That rotting stench hit me again as we got closer, and I had to hold back vomit, covering my mouth and my nose with my sleeve. "Oh my God, Jesse, can't you smell that?" I called, but he was practically rushing to the table and ringing the bell. "Oh, come on, man, they're obviously closed. We should..." A fucking plate with a stack of discolored meat appeared before my fucking eyes. If there were a pair of hands doing the work, I did not see them. Jesse didn't even wait to pay, just left his wallet on the side and took the food to the nearest bench, gorging himself on the rancid meat and moaning. I tried to get closer, but the smell was overbearing, the assaulting stench of sweetness and putrid meat. "Just, wait in the truck. I'll be ready as soon as I'm... Oh, God. Yes." Jesse was drooling between bites, thick globs of saliva as he scarfed the food down. choking before continuing. I was so lightheaded at the time that I didn't think it'd be so bad if I went for a quick drive to clear my head. I nodded and rushed away from the smell as fast as I could, desperate for clear air. Turning on the AC and putting some piano music on, I tilted back the driver's seat and rested my eyes for a few minutes. I could feel my stomach protesting, every growl reminding me that while there was food nearby, I sure as hell wouldn't have it. I grabbed my stomach in protest, but it simply growled more, every twitch like a finger prodding against the flesh. The sound shifted and changed, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Honk. I came to before I'd opened my eyes, and I am so thankful I didn't immediately do so. I could hear the groans, the dripping of the meat, the gaudy, shambolic outfit. He was in the car. The meat clown was in the fucking car, his decaying body leering at me, making that fucking noise. Honk. It sounded like a death rattle, the sort of thing you'd hear someone say when it's their final breath before passing on. I heard a sound I couldn't place, like the sound of a wet bag being dragged along the concrete. I looked down and spied a chunk of gray sludge being pulled from his pockets, directed towards my face. I could see it undulating. I wasn't about to let him put that shit on me, so I instinctively leaned my head forward and smacked it into his. I immediately regretted my choice. I missed. A punch to the side of the temple left my ears ringing and my eyes blurred. Adrenaline was the only thing fueling me at this stage. But as I turned to scream at him to get out, I saw his face. Wide-eyed and with a switchblade to his eyelids, he was rapidly slicing through them with remarkable precision and skill, all the while making that dreadful sound. But it was changing. Honk. He hissed as he split one eyelid free, the eye rolling in its socket. He started on the lower one as I stood frozen in fear and horror. In less than 30 seconds, both eyelids were gone, and he cut the soft stalk holding the eye in one slice before cupping it in his hands, still making that sound. He put the hand out toward me as I rapidly scooted away. I could see the eyelids and the eyes were rotted, fetid, and decayed. He persisted, pushing it towards my mouth until I had no room to move. My hand reached for the handle and all my weight fell out and back onto the concrete, my skull hitting the concrete with a thud. The next thing I knew, he was holding me down as he forced his hand down on my mouth as it filled with soft meat. He pushed hard on my jaw against my will, and as it burst in my mouth, I felt my vision fade and the world around me shake, his expression never changing as that sound carried me into unconsciousness. The first thing I felt when I awoke was pure disgust. I retched and tried to vomit, but it wouldn't come up. Not even when I put my fingers down my throat, as if there was nothing in my body to regurgitate. Now, I was in the driver's seat, the clock showing it had been 3 hours since I'd left Jessie. I couldn't taste anything in my mouth, and there seemed to be no damage to the car, so I chalked it up to a horrific nightmare. Concern overtook confusion rapidly, and I got out of the truck to find Jessie. It was still early hours and the place looked even darker than before, but in the short time it took to reach the food truck, I could see far more people aimlessly wandering around, some on the benches and others congregating. Was there a late-night craving or something? Maybe the bars had just let out and they wanted that drunken fast food experience. The rotting stench from earlier was totally gone, too. I could smell the succulent aroma of sizzling bacon, tender, crispy chicken, a medium rare steak, and flavors that took me straight back to being a kid again. My dad making a barbecue on a summer's eve and playing Nintendo while I happily ate and kicked my feet. God, I wanted that feeling so badly. I couldn't help but feel hungry in that moment. You know? Captured by the memory. I was so lost in the moment that I almost missed Jesse. When I snapped out of it, I saw him. All of him. He was still eating, his jaw locked and ripping at the hinge, muscles still pumping, and the tongue lazily drooping over the side as gnarled hands shoved more cold meat into his gullet, the throat akin to that of a duck, and just absorbing it into his frame, not even properly chewing. But the eyes were vacant and milky, the nostrils weren't moving, and his stomach was bloated. Whatever was pushing him to continue eating had taken his soul with it. This was no longer Jesse. This was something else. Something horrifying. I looked around, wondering why nobody had stopped him or called for help. But when one of the women passed me, I noticed the similarities between her and the meat clown. Sallow skin, sunken eyes, gaunt features. All signs of pure malnutrition and a zombified state. What the fuck was I in the middle of? The smell was overwhelming in much the opposite way from earlier, threatening to take me away into another beautiful memory and making my stomach squeeze and groan in protest. But I fought to keep focused. My shock, the only thing stopping me from crying at the sight of my dead friend. Something cut the air, though. It ripped through it, and every person surrounding me perked their ears out and snapped their eyes to where Jesse sat. It sounded like someone stamping on a packet of sauce. It was squishy, and followed by a distinct pop and a wet thud. Jesse's stomach had ripped open, his entrails scattering on the floor and in his lap. Immediately, the people around rushed to him, knocking me aside as they fought each other to grab the plates, scrape, or, in a truly barbaric fashion, pulling at his entrails and squeezing out pieces of digested meat to savor. I stumbled back until I bumped the counter of the truck, hitting the bell with a horrid honk. Snapping around, I saw the sign in clear English. Pav loves meat. Just like before, a pair of unseen hands rushed to attention as the smoke billowed, and a smell so overpowering filled my lungs that made me cry. The violence 10 feet away, a distant memory. Even the meat clown's distant, horrifying smile wasn't enough to sour my mood, or my craving for that memory food again. Nothing was. There was a small package in my hands. I didn't realize I was even holding it, not until I was back in my car. Sunlight will be creeping over the horizon soon, and I've no doubt people will ask where Jesse is. But I doubt they'll ever find him. The package is a small to-go box, wrapped in foil, and still hot to the touch. The smell making me smile when it wafts my way. The emotion like looking at a puppy you're taking home after losing your former best friend. The issue I'm faced with now is that in addition to the horrific hunger I can feel building in my stomach, I can look around and see people going about their early morning routine. Each one of them with that same sign the meat clown was holding. All of them directed at me. Honk if you're hungry. I can't see the food truck, the people, Jesse, or anything else but the signs and the visions of better days with better food. I can only hear the honking, and I am so hungry.
How I Became a Vegetarian. Written by CommonGrackle. Performed by Ashley Arndt. For Chilling Tales for Dark Nights and the Evil Idol competition. My ex-husband and I divorced on better terms than most. Frank was always a good father to our 3-year-old son. And deep down, I think he still loved me. But truth be told, he was never that bright, and a pretty huge pushover. That's why I was surprised, but not absolutely shocked, when he came home one day to confess that he'd cheated on me with a coworker. He told me like a car salesman pitching a deal.
It's not really cheating though, honey. Lola opened my eyes to everything. We're all just animals. Monogamy isn't natural. I didn't choose Lola over you. I'm choosing her and you,
Frank said. His eyes were wide and his smile genuine. To my utter disgust, he believed what he was saying. I sent him packing that day. Fortunately for me, Lola didn't believe it was natural for her to raise another person's offspring, so I ended up with full custody of Henry without a fight. There was the occasional overnight visit at his dad's house, but I tried to keep them as limited as I could while still allowing Henry to have a relationship with his father. To be perfectly honest, I couldn't stand Lola. Not only was she a homewrecker, yes, I totally acknowledge that my ex had an equal part in cheating, but she was also batshit insane. I don't have anything against vegans in general, but Lola was a vegan on a militant level. When Henry asked his dad if he could have chicken nuggets for dinner during a visit, Lola had some choice words for him.
We are animals too, Henry. We don't eat our own kind. It's wrong. You're little yet, so you can't be blamed. But your mommy is a bad, bad mommy if she lets you eat our poor murdered sisters and brothers.
This broke my little Henry's heart, and he made Frank call me to pick him up. Naturally, his father didn't try to correct Lola's words, coward as he was.
Am I bad, Mommy?
He asked on the drive home.
No, honey, no. You're such a good boy.
Lola's crazy, I said. He reached his hand to my arm from his booster seat behind me.
You're not a bad mommy,
he said, tears welling up in his eyes. You bet I bought that kid chicken nuggets on the way home. I was ready to wring that woman's neck. But instead, I tried to be the adult
and called my ex to explain why what happened was unacceptable. He agreed with me and promised it wouldn't happen again, but the thing is, he always agrees with the person talking to him. I wasn't necessarily reassured that the issue wouldn't happen again, but I did feel better after giving him a piece of my mind. It was about a month later that the break-in happened. When I got home after picking Henry up for daycare, we found our house absolutely trashed. I took Henry back to the car and called the police. Once the officers had given us the all clear and verified no one was still in the house, I left Henry in front of my laptop with a snack and My Neighbor Totoro playing and went to speak to the cops. The house looked completely ransacked, and there was a good deal missing. Most notably, my kitchen was pretty much emptied. I had been a bit of an amateur chef for a while, and had a great deal of quality cookware. My all-clad, Le Creuset, Noritake, and Crock-Pot brand cookware and dishes had all been stolen, along with my carefully chosen Wusthof knife set and all of my flatware. It was surprising to me what the thieves had chosen to take, but the cops explained that in robberies, often what is easiest to pawn is what is taken. My laptop would have been too easily traceable, and my TV was too big to take in a time crunch. As the police took their photos and I began my list of stolen items to turn into my insurance company, my heart sank deep into my stomach. Our cat, Penelope, hadn't greeted us yet. I dropped my notebook and began searching the house. "Here, kitty kitty," I called from room to room with increasing desperation. No cat answered my call. My fears were confirmed after I had checked the last of Penelope's usual hiding places. Our cat was gone. The police told us there was nothing they could do about the cat. It was most likely that she had simply escaped while the robbery was taking place. Naturally, Henry was devastated. We posted flyers around the neighborhood and checked regularly with local animal shelters, but nothing came of it. Penelope was an indoor cat and didn't have an identifying tag or even a collar. Frank was surprisingly supportive during our recovery from the theft and pet loss. He brought dinner for us that night. It was vegan, but the thought was nice. And even slept over on the couch because Henry was scared the bad guys might come back. I was pretty impressed with the way Frank stepped up in our time of crisis. So when he told me that Lola wanted to have a dinner, just me and her to clear the air, I said I'd think about it. After all, I was an adult and could just leave if she started acting crazy. Over a month passed since the robbery, and there was no sign of the cat, and no official invitation from Lola. Not that we hadn't heard from her entirely. She had sent Frank over with a piece of meteorite that she claimed would protect us from any further misfortune, although I wasn't sure what information she was basing that belief on. Included with the meteorite was a note explaining that we shouldn't be sad our cat got out, because keeping a pet locked up in a house is wrong. She even went so far as to say the thieves probably took it upon themselves to free Penelope from the tyranny of man. What a comforting and thoughtful gift, right? I'd nearly forgotten about Frank's request that I consider a dinner with her when I got a text from a number I didn't have saved in my phone.
"Would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow? It would be cruelty-free, of course. I hope that doesn't offend you."
I'd give you 3 guesses at who sent the text, but I bet you'd only need 1. Eating vegan didn't offend me, but her text definitely got my dander up. Fortunately, I was too tired to worry much about the text, or how bitchy it was. Dealing with the insurance company to replace our stolen items was becoming a second job in itself, and I was not up for an argument. "Sure, we can have dinner," I typed back.
"See you at 5:15,
she said. There was no way I was going to subject my son to another meal with Lola, so I made arrangements to drop Henry off at his grandparents' for a sleepover. They were happy to have him for the night, and Henry was able to get his mind off of his still missing cat. It was a win-win. For them, at least. I still had to suffer through dinner with Crazy. Repeating over and over to myself that keeping a good relationship with Frank, and therefore Lola, was important to my son's mental health. I set off to my ex's house. When I got there, I was surprised to see how normal the meal looked. Despite how obnoxious she was, Lola had clearly made an effort to create a passable meal substitute for our dinner. While the food passed for normal, the home decor certainly didn't. A large chart showing the locations of the chakras was painted on the wall. Each chakra had its own shelf with a brightly colored rock on it. No wall was painted the same color as the next, with the kitchen/dining room being bright yellow, blue, green, and orange. The table was low to the ground and deep purple, with pillows to sit on instead of chairs. Candles of every possible shape and color sat on any available flat surface. If this were anyone else's home, I might have considered it to be a quirky fun style. But it was Lola's, so I considered it a testament to her crazy personality instead.
"Frank won't be joining us for dinner. He had to stay late at work,"
she said. She ushered me toward a cushion and gestured for me to sit.
"I'm so glad you could come. I know this isn't the most ideal situation for us, and I thought it would be nice if we could, find some common ground, you know?"
she asked. "Common ground? Like what?" I asked.
I don't know. Maybe you could try not eating our fellow animals?"
she said. There it was. The Lola we all know and hate. Look, I'm fine with you being vegan, but I'm not. And you're just gonna have to be okay with that, I said, trying to keep my voice as calm as possible. Can we just talk about something else?
"Maybe you'll change your mind someday,"
she said. I rolled my eyes. Doubt it.
"Okay, sorry for bringing it up. Let's eat before everything gets cold. I made it special for you,"
she said. We sat in awkward silence for a while as we ate. I was relieved she was no longer proselytizing, but it was starting to get really uncomfortable. This honestly tastes a bit like real meat. The texture is even spot on, I said. I was actually pretty impressed that beans and soy could be transformed so well. Lola hadn't touched her meat substitute yet, and instead picked daintily at her salad.
"Oh, it is real,"
she said. Her voice was casual, as if this was the most normal thing in the world to say. "You cooked meat?" I asked. I was sure I had misunderstood.
"Oh, yeah. I didn't know how else to get you to understand,"
she said. Understand what, exactly? Is this the common ground you're working on?
I asked.
Yep, exactly. I just needed a way to show you how wrong it is to eat meat,
she said. So, you made meat? I asked. Her explanation made no sense.
Yeah, but this meat you should recognize. I made it special for you, so you could see how sad it is when an animal is killed just to be eaten,
she said. Lola was smiling from ear to ear.
Why don't you cut off another slice for yourself?
She asked happily, handing me a knife. Not just any knife, though. A Wusthof knife. My Wusthof knife. Complete with the dent I'd made in the handle 2 years ago. She must have seen the recognition on my face because she added,
People who use cookware for murder don't deserve to have it. I'm sure you'll understand.
She made a frowny face.
Or can the big bad carnivore not do it? Different when it's an animal you knew personally, huh?
She asked. Penelope. Bile rose in my throat as I ran to the bathroom. My head filled with images of Lola murdering and cooking my cat. Tears ran down my face as I violently retched into the toilet. That's when I saw it. The dried drips of blood down the sides of the pink bathtub. I wasn't sure if I could handle what was beyond the curtain, but wanting to know for sure, to have proof to show Frank how monstrous Lola was, I ripped the curtain back. Blood rushed through my ears, and my breath stopped in my lungs. Yet somehow, a scream ripped through my throat. There in the bathtub, with empty caverns carved out where muscles used to be, lay the corpse of my ex-husband. Lola is now doing life in prison, but it will never feel like justice was completely served. How can any punishment she receives ever make up for Henry losing a father, or the unending nightmares I will endure for the rest of my life? Penelope eventually made her way home. But what is a cat to a boy who has lost his father? During the court proceedings, Lola freely admitted to what she had done. I bet you won't eat meat anymore now, will you? This was the last thing she said to me, screaming out the words as she was led away by prison guards. She seemed so proud of herself, as much as I don't want her to have that satisfaction. She's right. I'll never eat meat again.
It wasn't like I was snooping. I was just out for an evening walk, and my neighbor Raoul had his curtains wide open. There was light, there was movement, and I looked. Anyone would have. I wasn't sticking my nose where it didn't belong. Raoul was having a dinner party. there were 3 people I didn't recognize seated around the table with him. Judging by the smiles and animated gestures, everyone was having a good time, except for Raul. He was gazing blankly ahead, totally disengaged from the party around him. I gave a little wave because I thought he'd seen me, but when he didn't respond, I realized that he was just staring at his own reflection in the window. I'll be honest, I kind of stared at him too. He looked awful. He had bags under his eyes that I could see all the way from the street. His face was slack, like he was in a daze, and he'd lost a lot of weight since the last time I'd seen him. Not in the, hey, your diet's working really well kind of way. It was more of a, we've had to strictly ration our supplies to make it through this long winter look. I wondered if he was going through something that I'd missed hearing about. It had been a few months since we'd talked. Everything had been fine at that point. He and Diane had just gotten back from a big RV trip, and their daughter, Mara, was visiting from college on break. He'd seemed happy and healthy then. Something must have gone wrong. Speaking of Diane and Mara, I noticed that neither one of them was at the table. I craned my neck around, trying to see if they were somewhere else in the room, but it was just Raul and his 3 guests. It struck me as odd until I noticed that although the table was set, there was no food on it. So, obviously, they were just in the kitchen, getting things ready. Something still felt off, though. I found myself waiting, watching for Diane or her daughter to emerge, but neither one ever did. The guests didn't seem to mind the delay. Their conversation was as spirited as ever despite Raul's uninvolvement. The chatter passed back and forth over his head, but he just stared sightlessly outward, his gaze passing through me without even knowing I was there. I almost went to knock on the door. I knew things weren't right there, but I convinced myself that I was wrong, that everything was fine, that it would be weird to interrupt the party for no reason. Raul and Diane had guests over. They didn't need me barging in. And what would I say? Hey, I was staring in your window and I saw that dinner wasn't ready. Are you okay? I didn't want to sound like an idiot. I turned away from the window and headed back down the street to my house, where I made my own food and pretended I was going to stop thinking about Raul's dinner party. It kept bothering me, though. When I woke up the next morning, I was still thinking about his face. He'd looked absolutely wretched, and his wife hadn't been there. Were those 2 points coincidental or connected? All morning, I kept constructing scenarios to explain it, like he and Diane had both fallen ill, and he was freshly released from the hospital, but she was still there. The people I'd seen were family members, there to nurse him back to health. Or maybe just Diane had gotten sick, and he was losing sleep worrying over her. The visitors could be her family who'd come to be close to her, which might explain why he'd looked like an outsider during their dinner camaraderie. Then again, there might not be any illness at all. Maybe Diane had left him, and those guys were old college buddies in town to cheer him up, to help recover from the shambles of what had been his life. Didn't seem to be working, but that didn't mean that they weren't trying. I tossed around all of these ideas and more, hypothesizing situations from the mundane to the absurd. They were all possible. I just didn't have enough information to say for sure. One thing was certain, though. Whatever was going on, Raul wasn't well. So if I brought him food, I'd be doing a good thing, right? And if, while I was over there, I happened to ask what was going on, that was just basic neighborly conversation. I could say that I saw him when he was out the other day. I didn't have to admit that I'd been looking in through his window at night. Not that there was anything wrong with what I'd done, it just sounded a little creepy without all of the context. Easier to just sidestep with a white lie. The early afternoon found me crossing the street with a bag of tortilla chips in one hand and a plastic container of my specialty homemade bean dip in the other. I didn't make this for just anyone. This was guaranteed to smooth over any weirdness over how I'd known he was sick. No one was going to ask any questions if it meant I might not leave them bean dip. I knocked on the door and waited, mulling over what I should say to Raul. "Saw you weren't looking well. Brought you some food?" It had the advantage of simplicity. I heard something was up. Can I help? Shifted the blame off of me for looking in his window, but it opened up the possibility of Raoul asking who'd been talking about him, and I didn't have a good scapegoat handy. I was considering acting surprised. Hey, I made too much bean dip, so I thought I'd see if you wanted... Whoa, you don't look so good. When the door opened. It wasn't Raoul standing there, though. It was his guests from last night. All three of them. Hello! The one in front greeted me jovially. He had a broad grin and an air of haphazard dishevelment. He seemed mildly astonished to find himself answering the door, as if he had expected to be somewhere else. His thick black hair sat on top of his head in an untidy mess, looking as if it had been dropped there from a height. The other two hovered in the background, looking on with interest. Up close, the idea that they were family seemed much more likely. They all shared the same hair, the same thin build, and the same slightly disconnected manic expression. They didn't look much like either Raoul or Diane, though, so I wasn't sure whose family they might be. I realized after a beat that I had been staring instead of answering. Hi, I began. All of my carefully considered words had abandoned me. Sorry, I was expecting Raoul. He cannot come to the door. Extremely sorry. He would be, too, no doubt. What do you have there? He cocked his head to the side as he regarded the container of dip. Oh, well, I thought Raoul might be... that is, I was making dip and I thought he would want some. I made too much, anyway. I managed, remembering my story. I held out the container. Here, this is for him. A food offering, is it? The man at the door took the plastic dish from me. His fingers were thin and cold, like the branches of a tree in winter. For Raoul. Well, for all of you, really. I mean, it's not like he's just gonna eat it in front of you. No, to be sure. It is a rude host who does not offer food he has to his guests, indeed. His brothers had drawn closer and were peering over his shoulders at the dip. And so, this is for us. Yeah, for sure. All three of them were looking at me. Their gazes were somehow expectant. The silence stretched out. I began to feel awkward and spoke to fill the gap. That's not a lot, I guess, but if you like it, I can always make more. This is merely symbolic. The one who had answered the door looked at me, seeking agreement. I mean, yeah, sure. I fidgeted, uncomfortable in the face of their ongoing smiles. I was beginning to feel that there was a joke being told at my expense. I attempted to steer the conversation back to easier ground. Hey, so is Diane here? Or Mara? No, they are out. The grins continued. But they're okay, though. They had a bit of a downturn, but both have stabilized now. They will have no future issues. Okay, good. That's good. And Raoul? Has a bit farther to go. Just a bit. We expect him to stabilize tonight as well. Or tomorrow morning at the latest. Cool. Great. Good to hear. So... are you guys family here to take care of them, or what? He considered my words, then nodded enthusiastically. We are a family, yes, and we are here to take care of them. Okay. Awesome. Tell Raoul I said hi, yeah? And I hope he feels better soon. We will, yes. Thank you for your offering. Yeah. Absolutely. It was nothing. It was so much more than that. Still, their grins persisted. If anything, they were wider than they had been at the start of the conversation. It was getting downright creepy. I decided to bail. Listen, I gotta run. Good to meet you, and tell Raoul I hope he's feeling better soon. Enjoy the bean dip. Yes. This was a fortuitous meeting. We will enjoy the food you offer soon. Okay, great. Well, bye. I gave a gesture that was halfway between a wave and a salute, then turned away, feeling stupid without quite being sure why. Just as I heard the door close behind me, I realized that I still had the bag of chips in my hand. I almost took it back home. Raul's family was strange, and I didn't really want to prolong my interaction with them. But what kind of maniac would bring someone bean dip and no chips to eat it with? Besides, they'd seen me with the chips. I didn't want to give the weirdos any room to think that I was the weird one. It felt like losing a game I didn't know I'd been playing. I took a deep breath, walked back up the steps, and knocked on the door. It was opened promptly this time. All three men were in positions so similar that I wasn't sure that any of them had moved. The container of dip was gone, though, so they must have gone somewhere to put it down, at least. "Hello," said the lead one again, just as jolly as before. "You are back." "Yeah, sorry, I forgot to give you the chips to go with the dip." "Aha," he said, taking the bag from me. He turned it over, examining the package. "A bounty." I couldn't tell if his comment was sarcastic or not. His face was still all smiles, and his tone was totally unreadable. I felt a little defensive. I just didn't know if you had chips around or not. "No, none," he assured me. "There is surprisingly little food in the house, I fear." "Well, hey, like I said, I've got plenty of bean dip if you don't have time to get to the store." "Twice offered. Our thanks indeed. You are splendid." I was pretty sure no one had ever called me splendid before. Thanks. Well, like I said, I've got to go. Thanks for taking care of Raul and his family." "It is our pleasure." This time, I successfully made my escape. I hurried back to my house, absurdly afraid that if I loitered outside for too long, they would call me back. I wasn't even really clear on what had been so uncomfortable about the conversation, except for everything. The one who talked had been perfectly nice. The two in the back hadn't said or done anything wrong, other than smile too much. Yet, my heart was racing, like I just had a near-death experience, and my skin felt strangely numb. Raul's family was more than weird. Something about them was flat-out wrong. I skipped my walk that night. I didn't want to run into one of them outside or accidentally catch their eye through the window somehow. I stayed inside, watched TV, and ate bean dip until I was too stuffed to remember the creepy feel of his fingers on my hands. It took a lot to get there, but I was determined. All was well until the evening of the next day. I was just starting to think about dinner when there was a knock at the door. I opened it without thinking, assuming it was a package or something, but then froze when I saw it was the three brothers. The same one, the spokesman, was in front again. "Hello," he began. I had the unsettling feeling that if I were to play this greeting back over the other times we had met, it would match up exactly. There was no variance in his timing, pitch, or cadence whatsoever. "Hey, how was the bean dip?" "Regrettably spoiled." He held out the container. "What?" I accepted the dip, legitimately taken aback. I just made it fresh. It couldn't possibly have... Ooh! I made the mistake of opening the lid. A thick, rancid smell oozed over my hands. I nearly dropped the container in my haste to seal it again. The stench lingered, a physical presence strong enough to supersede my aversion to the visitors. "Man, I don't know what happened there. I've got plenty more if you want." "All spoiled as well, likely." "Nah, I can see why you'd think that, but I just had some this morning. Hang on, I'll grab you some." I stepped to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. A wave of foul odor rolled out, slapping me in the face. I staggered back a step. My eyes teared up as I dry heaved. This was more than just the dip. The entire contents of the fridge had spoiled. More than that, I could see mold growing thickly over every food surface, filling containers and nudging its way out to spill onto the shelves. "Unfortunate. It is as I have said. The foremost of the brothers was behind me, looking over my shoulder into the refrigerator. How did this even happen? It was fine this morning, and the refrigerator is still cold. I shut the door, gagging again as the movement forced a new wash of stench. I turned it into a cough, embarrassed to be showing such weakness in front of a stranger. Then it struck me. Also, hey, what are you doing in my house? We have come for dinner. He smiled pleasantly, as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. Look, I know I said you could have more bean dip, but I think you can see that's not on offer right now. I don't know what went wrong, but I definitely can't make food out of anything in there. Unimportant, he said, waving a hand magnanimously. You have other food. I raised an eyebrow. Yeah, so? You have offered. Dude, I offered you bean dip. It was symbolic, you said. No, it was literal bean dip. It was in a plastic container. I'm sorry it went bad, but I don't owe you anything. You made a food offering. For all of us, you said. Okay, look, you're getting creepy. I want you out of my house. We will leave when you have fed us. I took an involuntary step back as his two brothers stepped out from behind him. They were thinner and smaller than he was, but not by much. It seemed impossible that they had been hiding behind him. Yet there they were, all three of them, staring me down in my kitchen. All three still bore those manic smiles, as if this were some sort of game. Enough! I let anger disguise my rising panic. None of the intruders made any attempt to stop me as I pushed past them and headed back to the front door. You're all getting out of my house right now. Yes! My declaration devolved into a startled cry as I yanked the front door open. There, on the front step, was the first of the brothers, standing as calmly as if he had just knocked on the door and been waiting for me to open it. I jerked my head to look behind me. Only his two brothers stood in the kitchen. We move where we will when we are disregarded, he told me. He placed his unnaturally long fingers gently against my chest, pushing me backward as he re-entered my house. You will not be quit of us until you have discharged your obligation. Fine, I snarled, attempting to regain my composure. You want food? Here. I stormed back into the kitchen and tore open the pantry door. I could immediately tell something was wrong. It smelled earthy and rank like an uncovered grave. The light flickered on and confirmed what I already knew. Everything in the pantry had rotted away. The cereal boxes sagged, their cardboard soggy and warped, the cans bulged ominously, the potatoes were seething with grubs while the dried beans crawled with flies. Tisk, said the visitor, directly behind me once more. Your food. Whatever you're doing, stop it. I kicked the door shut, but by now the whole kitchen stank. Look, I'll feed you. What do you want? I'll go get it. He shook his head. You will not leave. Then what do you want me to do? I can't feed you if you've ruined all of my food. Not quite all. I stared at him, uncomprehending. What? Am I supposed to dig through that mess to find something that's still edible? None of that is edible, nor what was in the icebox. Yet there remains another food source in the house. Oh, I said, feigning comprehension. Yeah, okay. Let me go get it. All three of them watched me as I left the kitchen and headed down the hall, eyes wide and curious. My phone was charging in the bedroom. It would only take a moment to call the police. I just needed a second of freedom. I did not bother closing the door. I thought it might arouse suspicion. I simply picked up the phone and, keeping my eyes on the door, began to dial. I had gotten only as far as 9-1 when the phone was torn from my hand with superhuman strength and speed. The charging cable was dragged across my hand with enough force to rip the skin. I whipped around to find the brothers crowded behind me. My phone was crushed in the hand of the lead one, the jagged edges of the plastic and glass sticking into his palm. But he didn't even seem to notice. His eyes and the eyes of his brothers were fixed firmly on my hand. His tongue peeked between his lips to lick the lines of his rigid smile. I glanced down at my hand, confused, and saw that I was bleeding. I looked back to the brothers, to their fixated stares, and finally realized what sort of food it was they were looking to eat. "No way," I said, covering the cut with my other hand. The motion snapped them out of their trance, and their eyes drifted back to my face. "You should not call," the leader began, but I cut him off. "You're insane. I'm supposed to let you drink my blood? And more, you offered us food. I didn't offer you my flesh. You did, though you knew it not. Now, confirm your offering. Invite us to feast, and we will leave. And what happens to me? You will not survive." Wow, that's a heck of an enticement. You really know how to make a sales pitch. "No way. Come and kill me if you can. I'll fight you." "We will not fight you." Still, he smiled, the expression tinging all of his words with mockery. "It will be an offering, or we will have nothing." "Then why on earth would I give myself up to you? If you do not, we will watch you starve even as you would starve us. And when you are dead, we will find another, and another, and another, until we have our offering. You could prevent the suffering of others. You could save yourself from a slow death. All you need to do is fulfill your promise. You have already offered. Simply provide." They stared at me for what felt like an eternity. I could feel their hunger radiating off of them. I shook my head. "Never." "Then we will wait together until you change your mind." That was 9 days ago. I have had nothing but water since then. I tried to give even that up, to hasten the end, but it was too painful and I caved. I've regretted that each day since as the hunger digs in deeper and tortures me in new and painful ways. My body aches all of the time. My stomach is in a constant cramp. I feel weak, confused, feverish. My skin is starting to flake off and my hair is starting to fall out. All I want to do is sleep, but the brothers are constantly surrounding me, talking to me, smiling at me. Always smiling. "Fulfill your offer," they cajole me. "Release us and we will release you." They sit me at the empty table for meals, taking up seats around me as if we were all waiting to be served. They talk about what I would taste like, laughing about what parts they would eat first. They set out plates and remind me that I have but to say the word and they will fill those plates with meat. "You can even have a bite if you like," one tells me. I think it is still the leader talking, but neither my eyesight nor my memory can be trusted anymore. "You don't have to die hungry. We can give you the final taste of food." I consider it more and more each day. But somewhere deep inside, I still have hope. During our empty meals, while they banter and laugh, I stare out the window into the neighborhood, hoping to catch someone's eye. I see people passing by regularly, but so far, no one has noticed me watching them. There's still a chance, though. There's still time. I was too late for Raoul. But someone may not be too late to save me.
From author Nick Carlson, I give you King Cake. Mardi Gras' alternate name, Fat Tuesday, certainly applied to my family. It was an excuse for everyone to get together and indulge before the next several weeks of Lenten fasting. Gathered in the living room, we picked from a massive platter of chicken wings, nachos, and carrot sticks dipped in ranch, while a game blared on the TV. It's funny. As a kid, you see Fat Tuesday as the calm before the storm. You want a chance to pack up on junk before you spend the next 40 days in solemn abstinence. Now, as a grown adult who gets by on little more than a cup of coffee per day, there is no such storm anymore, and certainly no calm before it. Now I see it for what it's supposed to be. Just a fun deviation from the drudgery of daily life. The other highlight of Fat Tuesday was the king cake. Even weeks before the actual holiday, you couldn't walk through a grocery store without seeing an unusual abundance of gold, green, and purple. The closer the date approached, the stronger the sweet, almost plasticky smell of king cake frosting grew. Then, on the actual day, you were guaranteed at least 3 slices. One during school, one after school, thanks to a particularly festive mom who served us in the parking lot, and one at home after our lavish dinner. It was always delicious, but it was certainly one of those once-a-year things. With each bite, I could almost feel the sugar eating away at my enamel. Brushing my teeth after all that cake felt like stepping into a shower after a hot day. But what made king cake so special was the baby. It's a uniquely American tradition, where a little model baby representing Jesus would be hidden within a slice, and whoever found it would receive good fortune for the rest of the year. There was always a big deal among us elementary school students over who would find it, although with 30 of us in the classroom, the odds were significantly lower than finding it at home. I never got it at school, although I did find it at home one year when I was 8. I held on to the baby for a few ecstatic hours, then I lost interest. And then I lost the actual toy. They don't really do that these days anymore, on account of one too many idiots choking on a plastic fetus and threatening to sue the bakeries. Second grade me would have been disappointed. Adult me simply rolled my eyes at the morons being morons and ultimately couldn't care less. Besides, after what happened all those years ago, I almost never want to see another king cake again. Around 5th grade is when the novelty of king cake started wearing off, which was all right since the faculty stopped doing it for 6th grade and above. Nevertheless, the sight of glossy slices of cake on paper plates being passed around the classroom hit me with some level of excitement. As we dug in, I hesitated, but only slightly. The glaze over the brown top layer didn't seem as thick as usual, and the spongy yellow center was poorly composited. It had a certain charming clumsiness about it, like it was homemade, which I then realized was probably the case. I made a mental note to thank my homeroom teacher, Mrs. Kastner, for coming through for all of this. After class, I walked up to her and thanked her for the homemade cake. She gave me a blank stare. "Oh, I didn't make that cake." "Oh, well, who did then?" I asked. Miss Kastner shrugged and went back to her papers. "Not sure. They were just in our homerooms this morning. Very generous of whoever that was, though." At that moment, the lunch bell rang and I dropped the matter, rushing out the door into the hallway. Amid the cafeteria chatter, one inevitable topic of discussion came up. Which of us got the baby? "Did you?" I asked my friend Jackie. She shook her head. I turned to the rest of my usual lunch gang. "Did any of you?" Neither answered in the affirmative. I leaned back and poked the shoulder of the girl sitting behind me. "Do you know if any of you all got the baby?" "No, I don't think so." "Did any of you?" She replied with wide eyes. I shook my head, turning back to my friends. All of us wore the same perplexed scowl. Maybe our cake simply didn't have the baby. But as the minutes wore on and kids from other grades intermingled, it became clear that absolutely no one in any grade had found a little plastic baby in their king cakes. Maybe everyone accidentally ate theirs, I suggested. Don't be stupid, Henry quipped. The odds of everyone eating their babies in every class without knowing are too big to be possible. Nothing's impossible. The math teacher said so, Jackie retorted. We bickered all the way outside during our 15-minute recess period, and the moment we took off running to our schoolyard corner to play Foursquare, the king cake had largely disappeared from our minds. Until scarcely 10 minutes later, when, feeling dizzy and nauseous from the cake and my lunch, I had to stagger behind a wall and puke my guts out. It came up as a delightful mixture of spoiled yellow and purplish brown. I could still taste the remnants of the glaze in the back of my throat. Sickened and woozy, I sat out of the game and refereed for the remainder of recess. The rest of the day was uneventful. Classes sucked. The bus ride home was the highlight of my school day, and I remember scarfing down dinner that night on account of my empty stomach. I also refused the slice of king cake my mother offered. Just the sight of those pastel colors made me feel like throwing up again. The next morning, I woke up and lurched downstairs, ready to announce to my mother my intention to fast from soda for Lent. But she was already wide awake, her face grief-stricken and mortified. "Go back to bed if you want, sweetie," she said in a small voice. "School was canceled today." I too fully awoke. "What? Why? What happened?" "There's some trouble over there," Mom said, shaking her head. "I just heard this morning. They don't want any of the students there today. He'll be back by tomorrow, though." What trouble?" I asked. My mom shooed me out of the kitchen and up to my room. If her intent was to dispel the thought from my mind, then she was sorely mistaken. The instant I heard the television turn on and the tune of our local news station play, I crept down the stairs and peeked around the living room wall, watching from behind my mother's shoulder. "An unspeakable tragedy early this morning at a local elementary school," the anchor was saying, when a janitor sweeping the playground came across what he could only describe as, and I quote, "an embryo." I squinted and cocked my head at the word. I'd heard it before in science class, but it was always associated with chicken eggs and diagrams of cells undergoing meiosis. I couldn't wrap my brain around it. Why was it such a big enough deal to cancel school? "Be warned," the anchor was saying. She looked off screen as if silently confirming a difficult command. When she looked back at the camera, I could almost see the cracks forming in her professional mask. "The image is disturbing," she finished. A still photograph overtook the screen, clearly taken at night, with a harsh, overexposed flash of what appeared to be a section of the schoolyard. I nearly gasped. The precise location was familiar, as was the strange glutinous puddle in the center of the frame. It was where I had thrown up the previous day. But what remained of my stomach contents had apparently dissolved overnight. It was the raw, peanut-sized lump in the center that caught my attention. The color of a human tongue. It was shapeless, save for a few fleshy, protruding nubs. But what caught my attention was the eyes. Or rather, the lack thereof. Just two faded black spots on what looked like a skull. Or what would eventually be a skull. I gagged out loud and ran back upstairs. "Were you watching that?" my mother scolded as I pounded up to my room. But I didn't answer. The door slamming shut behind me, I slid down against it, my insides writhing with a grim, violative emptiness. Only now, as an adult, does the thought so deeply sicken me to my core. Even back then, however, I was disgusted beyond anything I had ever known. The gusto in which I had eaten that slice of cake had prevented me from picking out what was basically a dead body, which I had chewed and swallowed under the guise of sugar and frosting. The thought of a tiny, half-formed spine crunching in half between my teeth sent shudders down my own spine. It made my mouth bitter and tingly with revulsion. Puking it up had been bad enough, but I counted myself lucky. Imagine if I hadn't brought it back up. If it had passed through my digestive tract, another person's skin and blood integrating with my own. Then, with a lurch of foreboding, I realized that if my slice had a thing within it, there might have been others. I didn't come downstairs for the rest of the day, even avoiding my mother when she walked up to announce dinner. "Tuna melts, your favorite," she urged. But I told her I wasn't feeling well and I wanted to rest. The little lie was surprisingly easy to tell, as it was pretty much true anyway. I didn't dare tell anyone at school the next morning what I had done, despite our teacher's best efforts to discourage conversation about the topic. Everyone was abuzz at every available opportunity. Thankfully, the guys I had been playing Foursquare with hadn't put two and two together and realized my connection. At least, not yet. They had figured something else out, however. Word had spread that one kid from each homeroom was out sick, and two from the kindergarten classes had actually been hospitalized. The cake, the embryo, the sickness. It wasn't much of a stretch to link those three. By the end of the day, everyone had deduced that there had been others baked within the king cakes, and one unlucky student from each class had ingested bits and pieces from them. I kept my mouth shut. I knew already those other kids would come back cursed, forever castigated as sick, weirdo freaks for literally eating babies. By Friday, the burning questions blazed forth. Who had done it? And why? As far as I had determined, the cakes had just shown up in homerooms, and no one questioned them because of the holiday. There were no notes, and no one knew of any suspicious folks prowling the hallways that morning, and any attempts to get answers from adults were immediately shut down. That day, we were called for an assembly in the gym. Ours was a Catholic school, so we listened to a speech about the sanctity of life at all stages, and the victim was still a child of God, and how we were to treat the incident with supreme decency and respect. This included not going out of our ways to dig for answers or harass them out of people. I was never one to go looking for trouble, but I didn't need an entire assembly to tell me how horrible and wrong it all was. Whatever the debate, I changed after that day. Darkly aged thoughts clouded and intruded upon my 10-year-old mind, and I adopted a sullen disposition in the days going forward. Among those thoughts, however, was a desire against the administrator's requests, a desire to find justice and closure for those lost little souls. In those days, it was normal for children to be out and about unattended, with no phones or other means of communication. You don't really see that these days, even though the overall number of missing children incidents has statistically plummeted over the decades. It's all a matter of attitudes, I've realized as I've gotten older, which is why that Friday, I opted to stay over at school a little bit longer than normal. I had guessed that whoever had hidden the aberrations and distributed the cakes possessed knowledge of the halls and keys to the doors. In other words, it very well may have been someone already among the faculty or staff. Students often lingered after hours for extracurricular activities or study hours, but I had to make an effort to remain inconspicuous. Attracting unwanted attention was the last thing I wanted. It might have put off whoever it was. Devoid of students and teachers, the hallways were vast, empty, and seeming to stretch into indiscernible points in the horizon. The blue lockers lining the wall stood at attention like silent guardsmen, regarding me with their faceless visages. There was always something eerie about those school hallways, like they were missing something. Like something sinister was supposed to be stalking their lengths. But it had either forgotten or had gone entirely. Every moment you expect to look behind you and see a shadowy figure lurking in a doorway, but it was never there. And you were always alone. I hopped between open classrooms, whose rows of unoccupied desks facing marked-up whiteboards served to be no less unsettling. I would settle in them for 5 minutes at a time, listening out for the echoing click of footsteps down the hallways. Then I would move on to the next. The clocks read 4 p.m. I had not seen a single solitary soul in the hallways. It seemed everyone wanted to clear out early on the heels of Wednesday's horrors. I felt more imposed upon and more unbelonging as I migrated to the next classroom. What if it was all in vain? What if I only had my own paranoia to worry about? Psst. I nearly jumped through the ceiling at that. It cut through the stagnant air like a bullet. After suppressing the urge to bolt, I realized it was a child my age's voice. I looked at my right. The utility closet was ajar. Despite the low light, I could see a single eye poking through the crack. "Get in here," my friend Jackie hissed. "Hurry." She held the door open ever more slightly, and I slipped in past it. It snapped shut, and I was immersed in darkness, yet I could sense her presence uncomfortably close to me. "What are you doing here?" I whispered. "What are you doing here?" she retorted. "It's a secret," I said. "I don't want you to know." "Well, you shouldn't be out in the hallways," said Jackie, her voice lowering. "There's a creep in here with us." My pulse seemed to bulge in my veins. "What do you mean?" "I saw him," Jackie whispered. "He went in and out of the boiler room. He has keys there. I just know he's up to something." "Saw who?" I pressed. "A janitor," said Jackie. "But I can tell he's uncomfortable. He's not doing what he's supposed to be doing. He looks around too much. He's looking out for me." This episode of Horror Hill is proudly brought to you by NordVPN. I'll tell you, my computer was very fast on its way to becoming the biggest source of stress in my life. And my life was pretty stressful. It started out with big online corporations stealing my data, advertising things to me that I don't need, but sorely wanted. Like a new set of mountaineering crampons. I don't even own shoes. After that, it was the constant call to my bank to change my check card number because somebody had stolen it. Again. Hacked it right out from under my nose while I was buying those crampons in the coffee shop that I like. But the greatest insult, the one that made me rethink my life, was every single show I wanted to watch on Netflix was only available in the United Kingdom. Come on. This episode of Horror Hill is proudly brought to you by NordVPN. I'll tell you, my computer was very fast on its way to becoming the biggest source of stress in my life. And my life was pretty stressful. It started out with big online corporations stealing my data, advertising things to me that I don't need, but sorely wanted. Like a new set of mountaineering crampons. I don't even own shoes. After that, it was the constant call to my bank to change my check card number because somebody had stolen it. Again. Hacked it right out from under my nose while I was buying those crampons in the coffee shop that I like. But the greatest insult, the one that made me rethink my life, was every single show I wanted to watch on Netflix was only available in the United Kingdom. Come on. Did my honored forefathers really fight and die in the Revolutionary War so that they could get all the Netflix? Well, you just let the tyrant King George know that they can give me Red Dwarf or give me death. Or just give me NordVPN. Yep, NordVPN really solved all of my computer problems, and most of my personal life problems, which mostly stemmed from my computer problems. All I'm saying is, it works. While previously relegated to the dregs of American Netflix, I can now access content from over 59 different countries by changing my virtual location with one click. You heard right. One click. Is such a minuscule unit of time even measurable? I don't know how many clicks the average human lifespan can be broken down into, but I'll bet you it's a lot. But regardless, with NordVPN, only one click, and it's as if those geo-restrictions never existed at all. Which does beg the question as to why they exist in the first place, but that's a conversation for another night. And as for those thieving hackers, NordVPN is like a stealth mode for my computer, allowing me to traverse public Wi-Fi in absolute safety and secrecy. And those big corporations mining my data? Well, they're just gonna have to find someone else to sell barbecue-flavored macadamia nuts to, because I would really like them, but I'm broke. Regardless, these are just a few of the many uses of NordVPN, a veritable Swiss Army knife of cybersecurity. If you feel like you don't need that level of protection in your life now, you probably will soon. So try to stay a step ahead of the hackers. Go to nordvpn.com/HHVPN, or just use the exclusive podcast code HHVPN to get a 2-year plan plus a bonus gift with a huge discount. Because life is just too short to let hackers and massive online corporations and geo-restrictions get you down. Just let NordVPN provide you with the peace of mind that you deserve. Thank you for your support of this podcast and of the sponsors that make it possible. Her voice took on a sort of prideful steadiness. But he didn't see me. I hid. You're trying to figure out who did it too, I said. I could almost hear her smiling. I thought it was a secret. Well, now it's out, I confirmed. But that doesn't matter now. I want to know who did it. It's sick, Jackie. It's just disgusting. I know. Jackie's voice became soft again. I heard one of the kindergartners died from it. What? I gasped. Shh, she urged, and I felt her fingertip press on my lips. It killed him. It must have poisoned him or something, and he couldn't take it. Gosh, I can't imagine what that poor boy must have gone through. His poor mommy and daddy. She gave a soft sniffle that punctuated the darkness. My own stomach had twisted into a pretzel, and my face was heated from revulsion. Our mission wasn't about closure anymore. Now, it was about vengeance. So, where is the boiler room? I prompted. Down the hallway, near where it branches off, said Jackie. Hold on. She squeezed past me and creaked the door open slightly, sticking her head out, scanning the area. It's empty. Let's go. She goaded, slipping out. I followed, ensuring the door behind us didn't slam shut. Her shoes clicking on the floor added a ghostly layer to the seemingly abandoned hallways. I suddenly imagined I was chasing a wandering specter throughout the school, just out of reach. She ducked into an empty classroom, slipping behind the open door. I followed suit. She waited a moment, then snuck out again. Jackie was a girl possessed. She wanted what she wanted, and how to get it. Finally, we ended up in a classroom directly across from a nondescript door. Normally, I wouldn't have noticed it during the school day, as it had no letters and seemed to lack a door handle. But I saw the keyhole protruding just above where the handle would be, and I realized this was a door they did not want students getting into. "Wait," she whispered, crouching behind the door. "He'll show up." I crouched and tried inching up next to her, but my foot jostled the door. It loosened from the rubber doorstop holding it open and began to swing shut. "Oh no," I hissed, trying to reach for the handle. The door was too heavy, and it seemed to pull out of my flimsy grasp. It slammed shut with a crash and shudder that shook the room. "Oh crap," Jackie cursed. "Quick, hide!" I scurried to duck underneath a desk, but Jackie called me back. "No, over here, against the door." I turned around and crawled towards her, pressing my back against the closing door. It was part of a drill we'd practiced in case of intruders. But now, the novelty of practicing it during class was gone. This was real life. A moment passed, the silence broken only by occasional fidgeting. Then, heavier, almost older footsteps emanated from down the hall. We held our breath. Whoever it was approaching our door. Their presence almost felt like a cold, psychic shadow looming behind me, something only detectable by some long-suppressed primordial instinct. The footsteps stopped. I could sense them, just behind me, an inch or two of wood separating Jackie and I from their clutches. I envisioned a cruel, anguished face pressing into the glass window, eyes scanning the room for interlopers. The shadow seemed to dissipate. I let out my breath. That's when I knew for sure a teacher would have entered the room to try and weed out any trespassers. This, however, this was the behavior of someone who didn't want to be caught. Against Jackie's protests, I hazarded a peek through the window. On the other side of the hall, the man was twisting a key in the boiler room's door. I recognized him. He was indeed one of the school janitors, signified by his plain navy blue uniform. He was balding, hunched, olive-skinned. His back was to me, yet I could recall his face. Thick eyebrows, thin lips, dark, accusing brown eyes. No one would ever speak to him as he shambled down the hallways during the school days. I didn't even know if he spoke English. In other words, despite his rather unsightly impressions, no one would have suspected him first. Maybe eventually, but there'd be plenty of time for him to get away. Regardless, he had finally opened the door to the boiler room, swinging it wide open before disappearing into indecipherable darkness. As he disappeared, the door began to slowly close, and I knew our one and only chance to get down there was seconds away from shutting for good. The doorstop caught my eye. I scooped it up, threw our classroom door open, and sprinted across the hallway, jamming the corner of the doorstep into the narrowing crack. The silence from a lock failing to engage was followed by a sickly wave of relief. Jackie crept out of the classroom and joined me in prying the door open once more. A narrow set of rusty metal stairs seemed to drop into the floor, twisting into a gloom below, beyond our sight. I looked at her. "Are you sure about this, Jackie?" "Yes," she replied, but her voice was small again, and the low light couldn't mask a middling shade of green in her face. "We have to find out where that man's going," I said. "To see if he's the one who... You know." She nodded. "If anything happens," she said, "don't look back. Just run. Back up the stairs and don't stop." She then looked at me. "I won't leave you behind." "Neither will I promised. Then, squeezing through the crack and leaving the doorstop in place, we held onto the railing and made our descent. If I hadn't been with someone else, I wouldn't have found the nerve to push further into that darkness. Thinking back, it just goes to show how fear seems to amplify when you're alone, your traitorous imagination taking advantage of the empty void around you. Having Jackie behind me, feeling her warmth, was like filling the room with light I couldn't see. I felt braver, more responsible. The walls around me seemed smaller, but not constrictive. Simply put, I felt older. The boiler room was of plain, musty concrete, adorned with pipes and a few white light bulbs hanging from the ceiling. The constant hiss of steam snaked around and above us. My hand subconsciously reached out and found Jackie's. Despite the unfamiliarity, it didn't seem too large. The far corner of the wall was within sight, and most of the empty space was taken up by vast, protruding machinations with buttons and valves and gauges, the kind of stuff you'd trigger in movies to make something blow up. We avoided them as we meandered through the room, eyes peeled and ears open for signs of someone else. As we approached the far side of the space, we finally heard noises that didn't belong. Something garbled and melodious, like ballroom music, piping from an old radio. It was coming from a large section of room in a corner. A black tarp hanging from the ceiling blocked off our view of whatever was going on in that area. I somehow knew we'd find the source of Wednesday's horrors behind that tarp. But as to what exactly it would be, I reached out and pulled. There was the sound of ripping tape, and the tarp fell crumpled at our feet. The music became louder, and the first thing I saw was an open door set against the wall leading to the outside street, lit orange by street lamps. What lay between us and the open door was even stranger. An old, boxy television blared static from atop a small drawer. On a nightstand next to it was a boombox, the source of the eerie, poorly tuned music. Facing them was a moldy, frayed mattress splayed on the floor. There was a large, deep red stain plastered in its center. Jackie drew in a breath and grasped my arm. I froze up myself. As a child, I couldn't begin to postulate what had been going on there. Only now do I remember that the thin, spindly metal wires that littered the floor around the mattress were actually unfurled, undone wire hangers. I hadn't the cursed knowledge back then to make the connection. God bless my ignorance back then. Jackie and I barely had time to take in the grisly scene when the janitor appeared in the doorway. We gasped as he made eye contact with us, his face dour and unmoving. He seemed unsurprised, almost disappointed to see us there. Then, his eyebrows lowered into a glare, and he stepped into the room. We took a step back. Jackie tugged on my arm, but my legs refused to respond further. All I could do was stare back at the man, the mysterious figure flitting like a needle and thread through the fabric of what had happened this week. "What are you kids doing down here?" His voice was high and foolish, almost cartoonishly friendly, contrasting with his mean countenance. "What are you doing down here?" Jackie retorted. I almost laughed in spite of myself, but the janitor's gaze hardened further. Then, he moved aside. "Get out of here, you two. None of this concerns you." "What have you been doing?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You brought the cakes out Tuesday morning, didn't you?" His expression drooped even lower. "What of it?" I said. "None of it concerns you." "I very nearly ate whatever you put in them, so yeah, it does concern me," I snapped. "And a little kid died because of what you did. Does it concern him? What about his parents?" The janitor seemed to shrivel. He almost seemed disempowered and weak. "I regret that," he croaked. "Why did you do it?" Jackie whispered. Why did you hide all those little babies in the cakes? What?" She seemed on the verge of tears. "Why would you do such a thing?" He straightened a little. "You're mistaken. I only brought those cakes out and put all this together." He gestured at the macabre scene set up before him. "The one who actually did everything you've taken such offense to, well, he's not here, and you'll never find him." My heart twisted and sank into my stomach. "Who then?" "Someone brilliant." He flashed a smile for once. The flickering television static cast ghoulish shadows over his face. "I don't understand him all the time, but he's brilliant. And he has a sick sense of humor." He suddenly appeared troubled. "The way he laughs, it's enough to scare anyone into doing anything." He snapped out of it. "Doesn't concern you. Now get the fuck out of here." "No." Jackie was squeezing so tight my wrist felt cold and numb, but she inched herself forward. "No. You are not getting away from this like that. Tell us who did all this and why." The janitor's head cocked and the corner of his mouth twitched. "Oh, you could be my daughter," he said in a low, loving tone. "I almost had a child, you know. Almost. But the mother-to-be was forced into it. They wouldn't let us marry. And she was the only one I loved, the only one I thought of raising children with. But she was pressured into visiting that place. The clinic. That little spark inside her died that day, flushed out and discarded in a plastic bag." His lip trembled. "She never loved me again. Neither did I. Whatever we had died along with our child. It was devastation. You'll never understand. But he found me. He understood my pain, my spite, and he made me help with whatever sick plans he had. I thought there'd be a purpose to it all. Revenge, revulsion, anything to suck the hurt out of me. I thought others should hurt. Anything to feel a little less. But I don't feel any better. Maybe he just thought it'd be funny. Maybe he really doesn't care about my pain. If that's the case. Oh, surely that's the case." The janitor slumped to the floor, his face buried in his arms. "Just go. Leave me. You will never see me again. I don't want to see tomorrow. Just go." Shocked and horrified beyond words, we stared at his pathetic form for what felt like hours. But he never moved, beyond the occasional shuffle and stifled sob. I took a chance and led Jackie past him and out the door, into the twilight. He didn't follow us. We walked down the lonely street until the school was an undeterminable shadow among the nightfall. We stopped and looked at each other. We couldn't comprehend what he had said, or what we had even witnessed. But it was not for our eyes. It was not for anyone's eyes. "Will you walk me home?" Jackie finally said. "I don't want to be alone tonight." I held her hand again. Neither do I. The rest of the night, until I let go of her at her front door, was a dusky blur. But even though my own house being only a few blocks further down, that brief stint of lonesomeness in the night will never leave me. As time went on, word of the janitor that shouldn't have been began to spread, as it was revealed he had only joined the staff that semester under a false name. But formal investigations never revealed a true identity, nor a physical person to pin it on. Despite our brief encounter, I doubted it would have helped much. Everyone put the blame on him anyway. Though, as to how he acquired the tools and means to perform such heinous crimes by himself, no one could answer. The truth remained locked between Jackie and I. Nothing was ever found in the boiler room either. I guess he had done one last thing that night before disappearing off the face of the earth. We held a school-wide memorial service for the poor kindergarten boy who had suffered the most from that fateful day. Jackie and I weren't in the same homeroom, so we weren't sitting near each other. But we met each other's eyes once, and that one time was enough. The rest of the school year was gloomy and mournful. Then, our family moved away that summer. The school, the Wednesday of Horrors, and Jackie became small, dark memories. Life went on. New priorities came into fruition. It all became buried in my mind within a few months. As far as I know, nothing more came from the events of that week. They devolved to the status of urban legends, the dirty little secret of a small, insignificant town. But it certainly happened. If you know where to look, you can definitely find stories about what happened, just not the full one. I don't pray much these days, but on those rare occasions when the spirit moves me, I think about Jackie, how she's coping wherever she's at, whether she has a family of her own. I think about the janitor, whether he found absolution from his suffering and atonement for his compliance. I think about all those little souls who never got a chance to grow up, their lives cut short and played as punchlines in some morbid, twisted joke. And as for him, the brilliant man with the horrible laugh and the sick sense of humor, who had instigated the acquisition of those little, and manipulated a tortured man into following his demands. I pray that he had found his little joke to be funny, because where he's going, there won't be much to laugh at.
Chilling tales for dark nights.